morning. This is John Gunnan broadcasting to you from the West Coast and doing a review for AP Art History. Today we're going to look at Christian churches, and it'll be a nice counterpoint to what you did yesterday. So here we go. I will start you off with a little game of Art Detective. Art Detective is where you see a fragment of a work and you say, I know that work, even from a tiny fragment. So here is the answers to that one. And let's do it again. Art Detective. What does this come from? It's a very beautiful detail, I must say. Sometimes it's hard to get these really nice details. I try to take them myself when I visit a museum with my iPhone. And there is the answer to that one. And I have one more for you. Where does this come from? And hopefully you're thinking of the Giotto Arena Chapel. Okay. And I challenge you now to a game of Pictionary. Pictionary, where this little scrawl makes you think, I know what that is. And what you're saying right now in your seat is, it's The Slave Ship by Turner. One more. I know what that is. It is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon by Picasso. Okay. Well, we had our fun. Let's go on to today's lesson. Continuity and change, looking at churches. Yesterday, you went around the globe looking at mosques, and we'll compare today different churches and try to build context, because remember, you can always do visual analysis very easily because of your art history skills, but context is important to do well on the AP test. And on the AP test, the continuity and change question, I believe, is question number 2. How things change and how they stay the same. Another way of looking at this, if it helps you, are tradition and innovation. I think that language got taken out because, you know, innovation just sounds so much better than tradition, but many cultures are traditional. I think sometimes the art history books tend to privilege innovation a little bit. And another way you can do it, which will come and we'll look at today, is the universal versus the regional. Okay, so right now, today we're going to do a preview and a review. So in the preview, I'll show it and you just think in your head, do I know that building? And so then I'll just flash up the name of the building after you see it. So this is just keeping you, this is like flashcards right now. Okay, and then we'll come back to some of these and go in depth. There's a lot of different views of this building. That view looks like it's from a drone. Okay, San Carlo alla Quattro Fontane, St. Charles of the Four Fountains, something that we saw in the Counter-Reformation review. And what I'd like you to do today is to think about, how does this facade, the front of the building, both reflect and deviate from the classical? How is it like the classical, and how does it change? Tradition and change. And just to make this easier for you, I'm going to put up a classically oriented Renaissance building right next to it. So I want you to just put your hands out and count 2 or 3 things that are traditional, classical vocabulary, and then 2 or 3 things in a way that it's changing. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. All right. I bet you said some things about the curves and about the deeply cut niches and about that very dramatic string course dividing the building into 2 sides. Okay, this is kind of a fun question too, because we have a lot of churches in the set to look at, but they sort of end with that Baroque church. What if a modernist architect like Le Corbusier made a church? It would look something like this. And I just had to show this. It's not in your set, but yes, churches can be extremely modern, and no matter where you are, there's some beautiful modernist churches. Okay, so now we're going to take several of those churches that you just reviewed, and we're going to look back and think about them, why they're important, and compare them. Okay, so starting with Santa Sabina, I want to go back to ancient Rome, to the Forum of Trajan, and think about why Santa Sabina, how it's related to this building, the Basilica in ancient Rome. The Basilica was common in ancient Rome in cities, and you're looking at that big, long, tall building right there. And I know that sometimes when you look at the Roman Forum, it's kind of a complex, and you have to pluck out exactly what building you're looking at. But we're looking at this basilica, the plan, the three views, the interior kind of reconstruction of the interior. Because as the Roman Empire started to fall and fade away, Christians realized that the basilica was the perfect building to use as a model as a church, because it can fit congregations of people. Lots of people can fit inside a basilica. Much better choice than, say, a Greek or Roman temple, where worship was a little more individualized. People would come to sacrifice or whatever, but they weren't congregating in big groups to listen to sermons and stuff like that. But if you see at the top, the Romans entered the basilica from the long sides, not the direction that the Christians would. So if they were going to repurpose or remodel a Roman basilica, it would be, they'd get the door into one end, and they would also, the Christians would save one of the apses, because an apse is almost like it's a symbolic manger. It's the end of the church where the altar is. And so that functioned really well. It was a great building to repurpose. So here is a one that was built actually as a basilica type building, built as a Christian church. It's a beautiful building, Santa Sabina in Rome. And look at what great shape it is on the inside. Really, really outstanding. And as we move through history, you'll see that this basilica thing continues to have an effect. Okay, and now I'm going to skip to our prototype Romanesque church. It's the Abbey Church of Saint Foy, you can say, Saint Foy, whichever, if you speak French, you can say. And it is in southwest France. And I wanted to call attention to these two words, because my students sometimes can mix up these words. Okay, Roman and Romanesque. So Roman, of course, refers to what we were just looking at with the Trajan's Forum and the Basilica, but this is Romanesque. So if you think of the ending esque, that means like, Roman inspired. And I bet you can think of some other things to call esque. In fact, just think of one of your best friends. If one of my friends who just called me, his name is Barry, so I could say Barry-esque. You're acting very Barry-esque today. So that's a fun ending of a word, but don't mix those two up. It's very important to keep them sorted out. So we've got several views of this church in the village, and in the village of Conques, where it is. And here's a plan, and I have some other plans to show at the beginning. If it was a normal year, I would say you'll probably see a plan on the AP test, but I'm not so sure this year, because it's a abbreviated test. Plans are important though, and I think plans can be a little difficult. If I think about the way a church is used, this church is like a basilica. You can see the long basilica shape with the apse, but you can also see that they added a transept. So I'm going to try to get my pointer on screen. Here we go. I'll just point to it. There is your transept that cuts through so that the plan of the church can be cruciform or the form of a cross. Okay, so I'm going to take you into the entrance of the church with my pointer. And the Christian churches generally face west. And that was a reaction against the Greek and Roman temples that often were facing east. So let's see, my pointer is here. I'm going to enter the church on the right portal. There's two doors. You go in the right and you're in the narthex, which is the entry vestibule of the church. And then if you enter the nave over here, this long area, if you are going to sit in a pew. But if you're simply walking, if you're a pilgrim and you're simply walking to visit the relics in the radiating chapels, you're walking out on this part of the church, the side aisles, and we're coming down, we're going across the transept. And now you see, if you follow my pointer, we're in the ambulatory. The ambulatory is that section where you can walk around and not disturb the service or the mass or the priest talking going on. And you are, let's see if I lost my thing. You can be right over here and you can pause in these little bubble shapes, which are the radiating chapels. And you can go in, light a candle, pay your private devotion to the relics. And this is one of the repositories for relics in these areas over here. Now I'm continuing out and I'm going to go out back into the town. And since I'm a pilgrim and I've been marching around, I'm probably going to go to the bakery and get some scones. And the baker will be very happy that I stopped to do that. Okay, this is a wonderful view of the town of Conch with the church. And it's just always surprising. It's just a small village and it's really cut off in the woods. Think how hard the pilgrims had to work to get there. It was an arduous journey to be a pilgrim and to be walking on a long pilgrimage wherein your ultimate goal was probably Santiago de Compostela, way down at the end of Spain. Okay, and of course, the thing that made the pilgrims take their time to get through those thick woods into this little village was a very special relics, the relics of Saint Foy. Saint Foy is the youngest saint to be martyred by the Romans. And the bones or the remains of Saint Foy are inside this golden reliquary. And in fact, hopefully you know that word reliquary because we have a great reliquary piece in the African set. And I think one day next week, we're going to come back and we'll compare the Saint Foy reliquary to the African reliquary. Okay, here's a nice drawing. With architecture, it's always nice to have that upper view. That's a cutaway drawing, so you can actually see into the church and see the outside of the church. And you can also see that there's a monastery adjoining with a kind of cloister. And that's why this Saint Foy is called an Abbey church, because it's associated with a monastery. Okay, and by the way, those the Abbey church on the left there that you see, it has a big, heavy piers. Those are called buttresses. They really hold up the church. And in the Gothic church, which we're going to see now, they move the buttresses away so that they're flying buttresses. Okay, so this is a nice comparison. And even just looking at them from a distance like this, you can think of the churches were more numerous than the cathedrals. The cathedrals were bigger projects, and they were really associated with more urban settings. You weren't going to find a cathedral out in a little village like Conch. Okay. The cathedrals, of course, the Gothic cathedrals started around Paris, and the style proliferated from there, but it really remains by and large a northern style. You tend to find Gothic and the northern parts of Europe. So I'm going to put up the two interiors here of a Romanesque church and a Gothic church. And you would never mix those up, would you? Because you can just describe just how different they look, and how you know, the picture on the left is lit by a floodlight or something, because it's dark in those Romanesque churches. The windows were very small. The piers are enormous. They block out light, and over on the right, you can see the windows are quite larger. And as Gothic style developed, the windows got larger and larger and larger. Okay. And so that happened, of course, because of this new motivation of letting light in, having light be symbolic or metaphorical for the light of God, the lux nouveau, the new light, and also for this medium of communicating religious messages, which was featured in Gothic stained glass, as you can see there. Okay, another feature of Gothic was vaulting, sexpartite, and different, vaulting techniques that let the buildings go higher and higher, and really kind of broke away from the classic, or the barrel vault system that was classical and Romanesque rather. So here you can see the church from a distance, the Gothic church. And I know you probably know a lot about the Gothic churches, because I think there's 4 different pictures of it in the image set, 4 different images. But this is a wonderful picture of the flying buttresses, of transferring that weight down onto the ground, and therefore building much higher and with huge windows that communicated the religious program. So here you can see again, against the other views of the Conques church, Sainte-Foy, and with its big heavy buttresses. And look at the Romanesque church, how few windows are in that church. Okay, now here are 2 plans that look a lot alike. They're both cruciform. Can you tell the Romanesque one and the Gothic one apart? The Romanesque one is more simple. That's on the left, and it's a smaller building. Okay. Portals are very important. They have their own sculptural programs, and we may not have time to go into that so much today, but the left, you have a Last Judgment scene in 3 registers from the Sainte-Foy Church, and on the right, the royal entrance of the Chartres Cathedral. And of course, we know that in Gothic era, the iconography changed, especially with the favoring of Mary becoming a very big deal, the cult of the Virgin. Okay, so there's a little nicer picture of Sainte-Foy. I know in my class, we completely dissect this tympanum, and we go through it scene by scene. And it's really a lot of fun, because a lot of the sculptures, especially the one on the devil side, which is the right, are fancifully executed, and there's some really nice things to see. So if you see the pilgrims enter on the right side, so you really have to look up at the scary stuff, the 7 deadly sins and whatnot, and then you come out over on the door. And so this right left thing is very important, because you always know that basically in the Last Judgment position, Jesus is separating out the sheep and the goats, and you're going to always have the the bad things happening to your right and to his left. So that's just a fun thing to remember. There's a lot of interesting, great things in this tympanum. It'll take us a whole day to go through it. Okay, so these are some of the things we're just talking about. Thresholds, and we were talking a little bit about iconography too, how the Jesus in the mandorla, and then we're also thinking about function, how the architecture provides for functions as we looked at the way that people walked through the church. So yesterday you got to see the Cordoba Mosque in southern Spain. And here is a plan of the mosque. It's a very interesting, wonderful place. But if you see there's a church plucked down in the middle of it, almost as if it sort of fell out of the sky, like the Wizard of Oz, because this mosque was not destroyed. It was just used. It was respected as a huge monument and used. You can see there that the Romans were on this site first. Then the Visigoths built a church there. Then the mosque came. And the mosque is so big that it's really awesome. And then look at that church. It's just growing out of the mosque. You don't even see the bottom of the church. So this is this wonderful hybrid building that's fantastic. You probably got to see the mihrab yesterday, but here is inside, deep inside the mosque, looking right into the church. You can see upper top where the church comes right out of the mosque. Very, very interesting. And here is the Easter procession entering the courtyard of the mosque with floats that are carried by people. Okay, and this was just last year, so this is a ongoing thing, and it's always great to see how statues and things such as the Sainte-Foy reliquary are processed in the city and made in parades and festivals. Okay, another really nice example is the Santo Domingo Church, placed on top of the Coricancha Inca temple. Okay, and I don't have other pictures of this today, but it is an amazing kind of hybrid building where you see the incredible Inca stonework at the base, and then with the Spanish church on top. Okay, so you're gonna test yourself with some plans. I already talked about these. That's the Romanesque church on the left and the Gothic church down on the right. So let's go to some of the other plans. Hopefully you can say, well, that's like an octagonal building. What octagonal buildings do we have? I could think of two, but since we're talking about churches, this would be San Vitale. Okay, not Dome of the Rock. Okay, now there's a nice hint in this one, and this is a central plan, not a longitudinal plan like the basilicas, but when it says Domum Pendentives, Pendentives was that great invention that helped them to build the dome on top of the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. Okay, now that church became a mosque. So it went the other direction from the Cordoba Mosque, which became the church. Okay, this plan, I'll give you a hint. Hopefully you know, but you could see there circles and squares, the interplay of circles and squares, the favorite shapes of architects in the Renaissance. Therefore, you know that this is the Brunelleschi building, the Pazzi Chapel. And then this plan has a lot of movement, a lot of curving, a lot of gyrating and undulating. So this is the Baroque church. Okay. All right. So now I'd like you to think about in your homework today, I'd like you to think about comparing a church that you know well to another sacred space outside of the Christian religion. And I chose the Aztec Templo Mayor because it's not only in your set, it's on the part that will be tested on the AP test, but it's quite a important monument with different sides to it, different aspects to it. And here you can see the two buildings. And I'm going to bring on top of the temple. I'm going to find my pointer there because right through here, right through between the two was, this was a solar oriented building, so that when the sun, as the sun moves from summer to winter, which down in Mexico is rainy season and dry season, the sun coming right through at that equinox, which we just passed about 3 weeks ago or so, is the moment of change for the season. So I know that those buildings on the top involve the god of war and the god of rain or something like that. And then this was a place of sacrifice. And it's interesting how that word sacrifice comes up with Greek and Roman temples, with Christianity, and with Aztec. But the Aztec sacrifice is indeed bloody. So we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about the Aztec temple, but I would like you for your homework to think about what are some of the comparisons of the temples, and you may choose any church you like. Now, I had to show this because for part of their end of school party before winter break, the Sage Hill students made a Templo Mayor out of Rice Krispie treats. I just had to bring back Rice Krispie treats today. Sorry about that. It's a fixation, I guess. And they did a good job. I see pretzels. And then they also made a Koyosaki stone. Okay, you remember Koyosaki was the dismembered goddess on the stone. Okay. All right, now, our last thing for today is we'll talk a little bit about the great mosque at Genet. And yesterday you had this question, which is about continuity and change. So I'm really glad this question came up because it's like the question number 2 for this year. It's going to be a similar type of question. What is traditional and what is new, or what is continued from the old and what is going to change. So the thing that I talked about when I answered the question were the 2 materials and techniques were used. Some of them were the adobe, because that was an area where they had adobe. They dug it right out of the river. Adobe, you could also say mud. And then they had the wood for the scaffolding, and the wood was involved with a post and lintel technique, but it was also something that they could climb as scaffolding to replaster the building. Okay. And so then the other thing was there was eggs at the top of that, ostrich eggs. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Okay. So for the architectural features that showed continuity with global conventions, we had the all the things you need to have a mosque. Okay, so that would be the courtyard, the prayer hall, the Qibla wall, the mihrab, the minaret. All mosques have those, and hopefully, a lot of those start with M, by the way. I didn't make a list of things with M, but a lot of them do. So hopefully you can think about, well, what do you have to have a mosque? And then hopefully you can think about the same thing with the churches we saw today, okay? And then the things that made this mosque unique, and I will say that made it, regional, these are regional things, would be like not only the mud and the replastering of the mosque, but the fact that that had to be done as kind of a community festival every year. And that was that's very unique to hear. And then you're wondering about those ostrich eggs. I've never seen those with a mosque before. Well, those are a pre-Islamic tradition, and of course, egg, related to fertility. And so, a lot of times religions do this, where they take something that's comfortable and familiar and well established within a culture, and they appropriate it or kind of fold it in to what they are doing. Okay. All right, this is John Gunnan. I can't wait till next week. I'm getting really excited about the AP exam, even though I'm not taking it. but I'm going to make sure that you are prepared well for that. And next week, Allison and Napier, and I will be right back to do some more fun stuff with you. So until next time, signing off.